this project really gives you something to look forward to, because every day you're checking to see, oh, are there roots there, are the roots there? So it kind of gives you something to live for. Another population I really like this project for is the sensory processing disordered, or people with sensory processing disorders. This includes a lot of tactile and touch functions, sensory discrimination, and also motor planning. Also for mood disorders or depression, this kind of activity is really, it's hopeful, it's calming, and it's a way to kind of relieve stress. And it can be really distracting as you have to pay close attention to what you're doing when you're doing this. One warning with that is that you will be using some sharp scissors. So if you are working with anyone who could possibly be suicidal or aggressive, you want to watch that. So I'm going to show you a very basic way to propagate. There's many ways to do this. One thing that I really like about this specific method is that you're going to be using a rooting hormone, which really increases the success of this. So you can even use some plants that are a little bit harder to propagate. That's another point. You will want to investigate the species or the variety that you have, because some plants do not do this as well as others. Some really good varieties that do this are spider plants, ivies like this one here, geraniums, wandering Jews. They propagate really fast. So keep that in mind when you are working with somebody. So some of the materials that we are going to be using would be some equipment, such as this table. You can use a workbench or a counter. If you are working with someone who is not going to be standing, you're going to want to kind of adjust that work table space to that person. And if it's somebody with a bad back and they don't really want to be doing a lot of bending, a tall counter may be your best bet. Also for equipment, you're going to have a medium-sized mixing bowl such as this, and a container that's open on one side, and you want it to be really like clear or translucent, and also big enough and wide enough to fit over your new little plant, which is called a cutting when you take the section. So for tools, you are going to want a pair of very clean, sharp scissors. I do want to stress clean. Even though you are playing in the dirt, it is important that you're not like bringing in any kind of unwanted bacteria or fungi into your new baby plant, because it's a very stressful time for the plant, and anything like that, it will possibly throw off the rooting process. A small scooper for the soil, a third of a cup to a half cup will do. A small container for your rooting hormone. A shot size is perfect. This is a candle holder. I really like it. A clean pen or pencil. A spray bottle with an adjustable nozzle, because you want to make sure that it can spray lightly. And this is optional. This is a mixing tool for the soil. And this is also optional as well. It's a little dish to put your plant on in case you don't want to make a mess. So some of the supplies that you are going to be needing is your well-established healthy plant. You want to make sure the leaves are nice and green. There's nothing like funky going on, because if it's a stressed out plant, you're really not going to get a good cutting out of it. Your rooting hormone, as we discussed earlier, you really want to pay attention to the directions on here, prepare it accordingly. There are cautionary statements on here that you will need to heed. You need a potting device. I love to use a clear plastic cup with some holes punched out on the bottom. The reason why I like the clear is because you can really easily see when it's starting to root instead of guessing. 1 cup perlite to 3 cups ready to go potting soil. The perlite is really good in here because it adds a little bit of aeration to the roots, and also it breaks up some of the density of the soil to allow the roots to be able to grow freely and a little bit more quickly. And especially when you're using this for therapeutic use, you want things to kind of happen fast. You don't want it to take forever. 1/4 cup of water for the watering end of the plant. And of course, a little bit of water for your spray bottle and some disposable gloves. So we are going to get started on this project. So when I set up my materials, I do like to have them in order. So this makes it a lot easier to do what you're going to do. If you are trying to challenge somebody, you can actually like make everything like out of order if you're trying to challenge their cognition, or if you're working with someone that you want them to really work with their range of motion, you can have it further back so they have to really do a lot of reaching. For somebody who may have issues with sensory processing, this may even be like overwhelming to look at this many materials on the table. You could, to grade this down, have those materials on a separate table and just have whatever you're specifically working on at that time on your counter space. So you are going to don your gloves. This takes, as you can see, a little bit of crossing the midline. You are doing that. That's a fine factor. The next thing that you are going to do is you are going to get your rooting hormone and you are going to pour it into your a little dish like this. You don't need much, just enough to kind of cover the bottom of it. To grade this down, you can use a funnel because it can be really hard to pour in here, which I'm going to do because actually I have trouble with that. So I'm going to grade down for you. So I'm attending to what I'm doing here, which is a process skill. I'm using some caution. Make sure the cap's back on. Okay, so the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to dump my perlite, and my soil. You know what, something that may be useful is to have a garbage can next to you for things that you know you're going to throw away or don't want anymore. Just in case you don't want your table space to be messy. So now you are going to mix this in well. This here takes a little bit of gross motor as well as some muscle endurance. To challenge somebody who's working on balance, you can have them stand up and do this. Also, if you are working with someone that you are trying to do some sensory integration, you can ditch this and do this with your hands. You want to make sure all the lumps are gone. This is nice and well mixed. All right, so this looks really good to me. So what I'm going to do next is I'm going to use my scooper and I'm going to start scooping the soil mix into my cup. Now, for someone who may have a hard time holding a scooper, you can build up the handles. You can kind of use something like that. You can use something with a really long handle, or maybe even a smaller scooper if they're having a hard time with spilling over the sides. Or if you would like to challenge them to grade this up, you can use a little nubby handle, because then you really got to use your finger strength. This isn't so easy. So good challenge right there. So you're going to want to press this down pretty firmly. And this here is going to take some tactile functions to determine the tightness of the soil. And you're going to repeat that until you have about, a 1/4 inch to an inch or a 1/2 inch lip on the top. So you can do this either like I'm doing. You can hold it, or you can set it down on the counter, depending upon who you're working with and what they need. This is kind of one of the fun parts of the process. I like pushing down the soil. So next, you are going to take your clean pen or pencil, and this is going to involve a little bit of hand-eye, eye-hand coordination. You want to stick this down into the soil about you know, 1.5 to 2 inches. And you can go ahead and just like leave that there and put that to the side. Along, I didn't say this earlier with your rooting hormone, you can put that to the side as well. So next, what you're gonna wanna do is you're gonna wanna get to your plant. And this is where you're going to be using a lot of your visual functions and some process skills. You're gonna have to be choosing which selection or which section of plant that you want to be your cutting. Now you don't want something, if you have a plant that's got a main stem, you don't want to cut off that main stem. You want an offshoot of that plant. So, you know, kind of take your time and sometimes, you know, feel around a little bit, be gentle, and I think I've got my section I want. So I'm going to use my scissors, my sharp scissors, and here we're going to be using some fine motor skills and some handling skills, which is process skills, to cut a section of this. About 3 to 6 inches will do. You're going to want to cut this in a diagonal slice. Now this may be difficult to do if you, like for someone to like do the diagonal, so what you can do is have them cut like a regular horizontal cut, but then to grade it down, they can make a second cut because doing it at the plant can be challenging. So I'm going to go ahead and make that second diagonal cut right there. So the next thing I'm going to do is trim off any excess stems or leaves at the base because you don't want to bury those in the soil. To make this a little easier, you can actually use some scissors with that's a little bit shorter blades. This will grade it down a bit because this is a little bit easier to handle. That's how I feel about it. To make this more difficult and to make a more exact cut, you could always use an X-Acto blade, which is great because the more precise cut you have, the better the plant will do and the less stress you're going to put on it. Actually, or I'll show you. So I'm going to go ahead and cut some of these off because we do not need them. So this is taking process skill coordination. A lot of fine motor going on here. And you know, because this can be difficult for some people, you can always use a plant variety that has leaves that are a little bit more sparse like this. Make sure that it's a good variety to clone, but this may be a little bit easier for some people to cut off for a downgrade. And sometimes you're in and you need a challenge. So to grade that up a bit, you can pick like a densely leaved plant. As you can see, a plant like this is going to involve a lot of cutting, a lot of fine motor, a lot of meticulous work. So our next step is we are going to retrieve the rooting hormone. Set that out of your way so you're not knocking stuff over. And we are going to dip this directly into the rooting hormone. You just want to cover the tip of the cut end about, you know, about 1/4 inch. You don't really need too much, and it sticks on like magic. It's a wonderful thing. And then what we're going to do is retrieve our plastic cup with our soil in it. And we are going to switch out the pencil for the plant. So we're going to take this out. And while you're doing this, please calibrate how you are holding the plant. You do not want to be squeezing the plant too tightly because that could injure the plant. And with a good flow, which is a motor skill, you want to gently pat down the soil around the base of the stem to secure your cutting. Alright, so once you have gotten that, you are going to want to, again, this is completely optional, but I don't want to make a mess, so I'm going to put this little dish underneath this plant. Slowly pour about 1/4 cup of water You don't want to use any more than that. You want this to be damp and moist, but you don't want to drown your new cutting because it doesn't have roots yet, so it's not really absorbing the water from the soil. You don't want that water just stagnant in your soil. So here you're going to use some praxis, and that's motor planning and sequencing of complex movement to do this. So that's a good challenge for someone who, you know, may need some help with motor planning. All right, so next, you are going to want to take your spray bottle and very lightly, you know, spray your little baby. And then you are going to use this container that I talked about earlier to kind of create a little greenhouse. This will keep your cutting alive while it is rooting. So very gently put it over your cutting like that. So what you're gonna want to do next is put this in a warm area that is not direct sunlight. You want some sunlight, but if you have full-on sun, that's going to be too much for your baby, for your cutting, and it will definitely stress it out. So over the next week or so, while your plant is waiting to root, you are going to want to make sure that soil stays relatively moist. You can go ahead and spray it once every, you know, 1 or 2 days, the leaves, because the roots right now aren't developed, so really it's the only way that the plant can get moisture. So that is how you propagate a plant. I hope that that was very interesting and useful to you guys. I hope you will use this in the future. Thank you so much for listening to what I had to say. Can I take any questions?